Hello, everyone. Should we start our third and final part of our contemporary debate on the Ecological Crisis Symposium? It's been an intense day with 4 talks, but still we have some very, very interesting and passionate talks by Dr. Marcus Hall and Dr. Pınar Yoldaş. Who is there with me? Marcus is here. Hi, Marcus. So for the newcomers, again, I know it's like I'm repeating myself, but for the people who attend newly, I would like to shortly this time talk about why we're doing the symposium. This symposium is an act that believes in the potential of changing our perceptions of nature and our role in it, hoping that it gives us a sense of responsibility. And I believe that ecological activism should be supported. The ecological activism in streets should be backed up by activism in thought. And although it's not physical and loud, it shares the same aim of shifting our fundamental structures of destruction, this time through conversations and critical thought. I'm one of those who believe, who take industrialization and capitalism as the beginning of Anthropocene. So Dorothy would always tell me to use Capitalocene. So yeah, I believe that it started with, I should say Capitalocene started with capitalism and industrialization. And in its core, it believes that nature is an outside corporeality that can be consumed for humans' welfare. So, and we cannot expect a transformation and fundamental transformation without changing this perception, and that is still prevailing in majority of the societies, communities, and countries. They're still led by the same perception affecting, dominating all social, political, and industrial structures. So how do we shift this perception? Part of this is the symposium is through the symposium, I believe that today we should let ecological activism pass through in all our works, realities, and discourses, whatever your occupation, whatever your job may be, or your agency is. I think ecological activism should pass through it and should be expressed in all possible situations, even in our small conversations. Or encounters with small encounters with others. And to finally remind why ecological activism is so important is, I would like to say again, is that everything we deeply care about is entangled with ecology and affected by environmental events. Whether you care about borders, immigration, or you care about racism or sexism, or distribution of food, water, human rights, politics, feminism, social injustices, everything, and of course our survival and existence is touched by ecology and reemerges with ecology. So whatever cause we care about brings us together in facing the crisis. Our cares come together in our fight to transform this crisis with the best possible option. And in facing the ecological crisis, we come together also today. And I believe in the ripple effect. Hopefully this becomes one of them. Hello, Marcus. Sorry, I had to make a small introduction again.
Hi, Gözde.
How are you?
Good.
So now this is the 5th talk, and I would like to introduce Mr. Marcus Hall, Dr. Marcus Hall. Marcus Hall teaches environmental humanities courses in a science-based environmental studies program at the University of Zurich, holding a PhD in environmental studies from the University of Wisconsin. Hall is a historian of science and environment, recently serving as vice president for the European Society for Environmental History. His research focuses on ecological restoration, biological invasion, and disease ecology. And just a second, for his talk, High Art of Rewilding, Marcus Hall will talk about his recent study on the similarities between landscape management and earth art curation through Robert Simitson's land art works with examples from Robert Simitson. And then he will talk about the differences and his critique about restoration and rewilding and its critical position in ecological, let's say, rewilding, and how maybe we can be saved by artificial intelligence as a possibility. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for everybody coming out. And of course, the other speakers, I was able to come for most of this, but not all of it. But it was really fascinating, and I hope that I can create some dialogue here. I think this is a group that, of course, is centered in the museum and the ZHdK. And so I'm looking at intersections between some of the questions I have asked about ecological restoration, rewilding, and the art world and curation. And so this is really a question about how does land management and curation, or let's say art management, overlap? How are these two areas similar, or how are they different? And so my main case study here for this talk is the Spiral Jetty. The Spiral Jetty is in North America, and then I contrast that with a similar earth art project here in Europe, in the Netherlands, and see what we can learn from that. So let me share my screen, since it's more fun to look at images than it is to look at me. I think I can share this. Let's see here. There we go. So the high art of rewilding, and rewilding is a new endeavor, a relatively new endeavor that a number of land managers, biodiversity managers are excited about. And in a recent trip out to the western states of the United States, I was able to visit this site, the Spiral Jetty. It requires a long journey out to the desert and to look at this art object, or they call it earth art, that is at the edge of this very large salty lake, the Great Salt Lake. And so it looks like this up close. And it was created, just a little bit about the art object itself. It was built with bulldozers and dump trucks in 1970 by this artist, Robert Smithson. Some of you may have heard of him, or at least maybe even visited the site. But this was a group of earth artists in the early 1970s, late 60s, and they went around North America, a little bit around the world, and their idea was to use large-scale basic objects and create basic forms. And so they were given permission to do this on the edge of the lake, and this was their creation. And it's actually Robert Smithson's most famous creation, and it has gone through various forms, and depending on the weather, depending on the lake levels, depending on the winds, it has a different vision every time that you see it. Sometimes they call this process art, and so that's part of the artistic experience, or the aesthetic experience, is to see this in its many forms and shapes. When the mud is up or when the mud is down. It's located there, and it's what they call, at least the ecologists or the limnologists call it, an endorheic lake, which just means it's one of these lakes that doesn't have an outlet. And so the waters pour into this, and depending on how hot the summers are or how much rainfall, the lake levels go up and they also go down. And so it's a very dynamic place. And I'm thinking of other places around the world where there are other lakes without outlets. And some of the other famous examples are in Turkey, in fact. And so this Lake Van in eastern Turkey is about the same size as the one in Western North America. And there are very, very brackish waters, salt flats, amazing colors, different algae blooms create these different colors. And it's a favorite place just to look at and to visit. And certainly this is the inspiration for Robert Smithson. And I think in his mind, he couldn't resist not doing something on the edge of this lake. And so he created the jetty, or the spiral that we saw before. So as I mentioned, the waters go up and down, and this is where the elements of time, the temporal elements, come into this art piece. And depending on, again, the meteorologic conditions, the earth art object rises and lowers. The spiral jetties comes in and out of the water. And in fact, a year or so after he constructed this or built this, the spiral jetty then went under the surface. It was submerged, and then would reappear for a few months in the summertime, and it would build these amazing salt crystals on top of the rocks and create all these different lights of patterns and forms on the lake. If you visit it back in the middle 80s, it would look like this. There really wasn't much to see unless you could fly over it in an airplane. But then, interestingly, this is where the historians of climate, the climate historians and the artists would come together. And so it was created here in 1970. And you can see that the lake level then quickly rose thereafter. And it was a very mysterious artistic object that then sunk below the surface, but then reappeared. People knew it was there, but it didn't really reappear until about 2000, this century. And so you have this amazing art object that goes up and down with time. And it's worth, just for fun, showing you, since I was able to locate a video of the lake itself from outer space, since we're all talking about climate change. Let me just see if I can show you a time lapse of the lake itself as it moves around time. Let's see here.
Maybe you stop sharing and then share your whole screen. Yeah.
Okay. Or let's see if I could.
Yeah, it should work.
I can just get to the right buttons here that are.
No, I think if you just shared your PowerPoint. Yeah,
unfortunately, what I have to do is I'll have to show that later, because I have so many windows open right now that I can't locate the one. But you're going to have to imagine for a moment the lake levels going up and down according to the years and the decades. And so I'll just have to leave that to your imagination, and to suggest that it was a very dynamic, and is a dynamic, place.
Maybe you can put the link on the chat so people can just look at it.
Oh, that's a good idea. Let's see if I can even locate the link on the chat.
Then you do it after the talk.
Yeah, I think I better do it that way. Yeah. So the question becomes, this has been constructed many, many years ago, almost, 50 years ago. And what's happening now is the process of the elements has begun to slowly make the rocks fall apart, and there's mud that has been sealing in the cracks, and it's not quite as distinct as it used to be. And so there's been a number of calls here to restore the jetty itself, and to bring it back into shape, to make sure that it's distinct, to make sure the mud doesn't roll over the boulders. And there's field trips from different, mostly people in art classes come out and they look at the jetty and they say, well, the jetty's slowly disappearing here. And so they look at the artist's original intent, and it turns out that Smithson was very much recommended that the art object be left to its own design, that it not be touched, that it be left to, say, sink in the mud, or that some of these different distinct shapes and so on just be let nature take its course. But nonetheless, a number of other people are quite interested in keeping this as a monument to Smithson, who actually died a couple years later in a plane crash during one of his other surveys, looking for other places to look for earth art location sites. So Smithson is no longer around. Only his notes and some of his records can be looked at what the artist had intended by this object. And so what you have is a situation essentially where curators are in charge of taking care of this, and they have to make some very difficult decisions about how to curate this art object, which parts to maintain, which parts to restore or to build up, or should it just be sort of left to ruins and left to disintegrate. And this, for me, becomes a really interesting example of a very sort of eye-opening example of how one needs to look at similar creations by people, whether they're managed landscapes or whether they're intensively manicured landscapes, such as this one, or even it blends into the project of restoration, ecological restoration, requalification, renaturing is sometimes what it's called, so that you need to attempt to bring back some of the qualities that you think are important. And so there's some, I think, really important analogies to be drawn between restoration of art and restoration of nature in this case. And so many of the questions are the same. Do we have the technology? Do we have the techniques? Should we be touching this art object? Can we trust ourselves to be restoring a statue or a master painting? Can we trust ourselves to be touching Smithson's artwork in the Great Salt Lake? And so a number of questions come up about the type, the intensity of curation or restoration that should be done on these pieces of art. And of course, the danger is if we don't know what we're doing, then we can cause more problems than we have to begin with. And so even today, this is a close-up of the Jetty. Artists and curators come to this site, and the question posed is, what shall we do with this? Shall we touch it? Shall we pick it up? Shall we curate it? And what does that mean to curate this object of art? What does it mean to put this back into good position? So I think the questions with restoring a damaged landscape are very pertinent. You have to try to define what damage means. What is a degraded landscape or a degraded ecosystem? Is the Spiral Jetty a damaged site or a degraded site, or is nature simply doing what it does on this site? What's so interesting, I think, is to then place it within this lake system, this lake ecosystem that is rising and lowering. And you'd have to say, well, the lake itself is in part a natural object, but because of what we're doing to the earth, because of all the carbon that we're spewing out there, places are getting hotter. There's more and more people moving into the sort of the hinterlands, and so more water use is being consumed. And so the lake level itself becomes almost a barometer as it goes up and down of sort of the human impact on this region, or even on a larger area. As the lake goes up, then we can think of things going back to normal. And as the lake goes down and creates these huge mud flats out here, then we have to think that something's wrong, that there's not something quite right, and it needs to be put back in place. And so if we restore the art object, we have to think about restoring the lake and restoring the ecosystem on which the lake depends. Which brings us, I think, to the next question about restoring versus rewilding. And rewilding is a really exciting project that has become more popular, I think, just in the last 5 or 10 years. It's particularly popular here in Europe, and in particular in the United Kingdom, where they have a number of projects underway where they're trying to recreate a wild system, take an old pasture or an area which has been overgrazed, or degraded in some form. The soil might be impoverished, or there may be a number of invasive species, or there may be a number of problems that an ecologist could identify. And so they are attempting to bring the wildness back to this system. And the picture on the left then is really a classical restoration project where they're trying to recreate a system which, for a restorationist, really is a historic ecosystem. It's one that existed in the past. It's usually a better system. It's one before there were lots of people, or too many people, let's say. And so they're restoring to a previous state, which is considered better, deemed better in a number of ways. Rewilding can take its cue from the restoration project, but in many cases, a rewilder won't be looking back in time for this reference state or a historic state. They may be looking at a new sort of nature. In fact, sometimes it's called new naturing or rewilding. Sometimes they call it new development in nature, at least in the Dutch case. But I think here the difference here between these two projects is the restorationist looks back in time for a proper state. And it's particularly popular as you go into the New World, because the Europeans, as they expanded historically, they went to the New Worlds, the Australias, the Americas, the New Zealands, and brought lots of their own ideas, their animals, their practices, and then change those places, in many cases irreparably. And so some of the effort here is to at least rehabilitate. Lots of terms here: rehabilitate, restore, and rewild. Rewilding then would be the project of instigating more wildness into an area to try to bring that wildness back. There's really two types of rewilding. One is a spontaneous, let nature take over, let nature do the wilding, take humans out and let nature take over. And then there's the more active sort of rewilding, which then people go into, they insert appropriate species. In this case, the ponies, these are, I think these are clinic ponies, which are considered primitive breeds. And so what they do is they carry out activities, grazing processes, sort of like the ones that used to roam Europe before there were before there was huge demographic pressures on the land. And so what they're doing is they're using these analog animals to recreate ecological processes and push those rewilding forces back into gear. But it's a human project, because it's people putting these ponies back onto the land and then letting the ponies do the rewilding process. And so it becomes a spectrum of passive to active human activities to create these rewilding processes. But you can see where we're going with this. And so at what point does a curator allow things to happen on their own, as opposed to becoming an active sort of participant with the artist in creating a project or a product that is acceptable, or in somehow exhibits the art in a way that more people can appreciate that art. So there's this fine line between curating and rewilding, I think, and it depends on whether you're looking back in time at a corrupt state that you're trying to erase, or looking forward to a more ideal state, which is more what rewilding is about. The other subtle point, I think, is there's some rewilders, I'm looking specifically at rewilding now. Some people are trying to create wild processes, the wildness, an adjective, as opposed to the wilderness, the place, which was, in most places in the world, was once wild. So in one case, the rewilders are creating or attempting to create wildness, or wild processes. And in the other case, on the right photograph, they're actually looking at what the landscape used to look like. And a re-wilderness project then almost then goes backwards, doesn't it? It goes, looks again at a former landscape as being the highest goal. And so the re-wilderness rewilders, again, insert time into their model, where the re-wildness rewilders are mostly looking forward. They're thinking about new states of nature and allowing nature to reign on its own. So interestingly, and then back to the spiral jetty, and this was really convenient for this study in comparing the spiral jetty to the one project that Smithson did in Europe. The year after he finished the project in the Great Salt Lake, he was commissioned to produce a work of art in the Netherlands, and he always tried to find what he called, I think he called them unsites, not sites for his work, but unsites or maybe non-sites. And he chose this quarry in northern Holland, and he produced this, which you can see is very much sort of patterned along the same lines as the spiral jetty. He called it the broken circle spiral heel. And again, he used bulldozers and big trucks and heavy machinery and produced this sort of this twin object, this enigmatic object on the shoreline of this quarry. And this water level also went up and down, and it was also subject to the sorts of natural elements, and it also began to degrade and erode and fall apart after a few years. It wasn't nearly as neat as this. And the curators in this instance made the more dramatic choice of rebuilding this project. And unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of what it looked like, of sort of the disorder that this had fallen into, but it has been built back up. And in fact, around some of the edges, there's some wooden reinforcements to make sure that the borders are nice and neat. And some of the vegetation has been curated on the edge. And so in the Dutch case, they've been very unhesitant to have active management to create this Smithson art piece. They haven't hesitated to intervene, unlike the spiral jetty, where it's mostly an art object that is let go. But then to compare all of this to this Oostvaarderplassen, which is not very far away. This is the one, this is really a rewilding project, even though the Dutch call it sort of nature development, Naturontwikkeling. And so what they're doing is they place these analogous animals, sort of like the ones that used to roam around Europe 500 to 1,000 years ago, the Hek cattle and the Kunnik ponies, the so-called primitive breeds that do what they do on the landscape, and they graze these hillsides and recreate some of the landscapes that once were, but it's still a forward-looking project. Just to put a map down, you have the Robert Smithson's art project here in the northeastern part of the country, and the Oostvaarderplassen is down by Amsterdam. And in many senses, even though one is created by an artist and the other is created by ecologists, they're really doing the same thing, I think. They're looking at managing these lands very, very heavily, putting sort of their own visions on the land, and then creating these incredibly interesting landscapes, one with higher biodiversity and one with more interesting aesthetic spaces and shapes and forms. But nonetheless, the one on the right is called a rewilding project, and the one on the left is really a curating project. But I think they're doing very much the same thing. They're using their own human values to place their own ideas of what's best for the landscape. And so really one could begin to think of the ecologists as artists on the Oostvaarderplassen, and then the artists as ecologists, even to be aware of the lake levels and the different projects that they're working on. Human element is very much part of both of these projects. It really depends at what level, whether they're active or passive. Are they looking backwards or forward? They're very much looking forward in both of these cases. It's not a restoration project. These are rewilding projects, both of these, with very different results. And so the lessons, I think, to learn from all of this, and then obviously I'd love to talk about, I should really talk about the next issue of artificial intelligence, how we can put this into the whole project of rewilding. We have to first of all realize that the words are really important, which words we're using to describe the projects that we're doing. Whether they have re in them means we're harking back in time, whether rewilding or wilding. A lot of ecological restoration now is called intervention ecology, and then husbandry, management, and curation. But of course, one of the lessons here is that we have to be very careful about what we're doing, because there's a good deal of hubris. We may think we know what we're doing when we really don't. And so that's one of the biggest dangers of rewilding, I think, is the danger of hubris. To then end here with the whole discussion about a really amazing article, I think, came out in an ecology journal, Trends in Ecology and Evolution. And the question there was, can we extract humans and human values from our management schemes? Because the second we begin to create any of these landscapes like these that I showed with, we're putting our human values here. And if we want true rewilding, we have to somehow extract ourselves and pull humans out of the landscape, or is that possible? And so they've actually developed some programs, artificial intelligence, where they use drones in some cases to seed mountainsides from the air. And instead of doing this in a pattern which might be human valued, it might have certain patterns or certain echoes of human desires. These rewilding machines, or these drones, have been able to do random patterns of reseeding and create landscapes which supposedly have no human value or human bias inserted in them. And so that's what this study is about, is can we use artificial intelligence to begin to direct the rewilding projects that people are so excited about? We know that we're putting humans in those landscapes. And in some instances where we want to erase the human presence, can we do this through machines, through artificial intelligence, through random processes? And part of what they conclude here in their study is that's incredibly challenging to do so, because we humans are the ones who create the machines, and therefore we may be reproducing our own biases in the programs or in the apps that are used to then rewild the landscape. They leave it as an open question, and it's still an ongoing project that ecologists are working on. And one could say, well, is that really what a curator is trying to do? Are they trying to be completely neutral in their project and allow just the artist to display what he or she created? Or is there a role for a curator to actually place themselves in this art project or in the landscape? So to answer these very difficult questions, one of the curators for the spiral Jetty, his best answer was simply that we will just have to be patient and make no rash moves in order to avoid that issue of hubris that we are so worried about. So let me, if I can get back to my main screen and get rid of this. I'll stop sharing the screen. There we go. And I don't know if I went far over the time, but that's an attempt to offer some of the questions that come out of this.
Yes, we will have. I also have questions for you, and we will direct questions from Q&A. Please, if anyone has some questions, write it in the Q&A. We will address them in the open forum. Normally, we would have 10-minute break, but we overrun it. How should we do this? Maybe, should we immediately start with Pınar's talk? Heike?
I would be ready, but I think people should have at least a 2 minutes pause so they can at least have a biological break.
Okay, yes,
So I think we should meet in just like in 3 minutes again.
Yes, let's give 2-3 minutes break organically and see you soon. Thank you.
So, hello everybody.
Hello.
Pinar, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, perfect. So let's start. Great. Wonderful. Good morning. So Pinar, very welcome. I think for you it's very early morning in California. And we're so happy that you can join us today. I will introduce you shortly and then you can start your talk.
Heike, maybe I introduce you shortly first.
Okay. That's fine.
So everyone knows you still. This is our final talk, which will be a talk by Dr. Pinar Yoldaş, moderated by Heike Munder. To briefly introduce Heike, Heike Munder is the director of the Migros Museum for Gegenwartskunst since 2001 and the co-curator of the current exhibition Potential Worlds 2 Ecofictions at the Migros Museum for Gegenwartskunst. Heike curated numerous shows at international cultural institutions, including Producing Futures, an exhibition on post-cyberfeminism, Jimmy Durham, Ragnar Kjartansson, and Yoko Ono. Besides publications, she teaches regularly in various universities in Europe. There you go. Hello, Heike and Pinar. Stage is yours.
So thank you. So I continue with Pinar, as I already said hello to her. So Pinar, you're an interdisciplinary designer, artist, and researcher. You studied fine arts at the University of California in Los Angeles, information technologies at the Istanbul Technical University, visual communication design at the Istanbul University, and even architecture at the Middle East Technical University in Ankara. I have to say I'm quite impressed. She holds a PhD from Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and published her dissertation, Speculative Biology, New Directions in Art in the Age of the Anthropocene, in 2016. Her works have been shown in various international exhibitions, among others at the NRW Forum in Düsseldorf, Southeastern Center of Contemporary Art in Winston-Salem, Rodas den Kunsthal Göteborg, at the Taiwan National Museum of Fine Arts, at the ZKM in Karlsruhe, at the Schering Berlin Stiftung Berlin, at the National Art Museum of Beijing, and the Transmedia Festival Berlin, and if I'm right, at the 14th Istanbul Biennial. Pinar, you're part of our exhibition, Potential Worlds 2, Ecofictions, with 2 works. One called Ecosystems of Excess, and the other one, Kitty IA, Artificial Intelligence for Governance. Unfortunately, as you mostly know, the museum is closed until end of February, but we are more than happy if you can visit and see these works when we reopen. In your projects and works, you reflect how biological and ecological systems are impacted by culture and society. You're pointing out the side effects of a capitalistic and uncontrolled use of technologies, but you're also imagining and creating a fantastic narratives and organism on a post-human future. For example, in your project Ecosystem of Excess, which is from 2014, which is on view at our museum, you pick up on the ecological crisis represented by the Great Garbage Patch, the largest accumulation of ocean plastic in the world, located between Hawaii and California. Starting from this, you imagine utopian marine creatures that have emerged from this plastic soup, compared to the primordial soup that have entered a symbiotic relationship with the plastic particles in the environment. Your organs and species of the plasticine have evolved the ability to integrate the plastic particles into their bodies for productive purposes. My favorite one is, for example, the plastic balloon turtle that has evolved a shell composed of plastic balloons. Perhaps you can show us a picture later, who knows? This body part can be inflated as needed and thus makes it easier to swim when the sea level rises. The other projects of yours that is currently shown at our museum is the video installation, the Kitty IA, Artificial Intelligence for Governance from 2016. In the video, it is the year 2039. And then artificial intelligence in the guise of an animated cat has seized world power because humanity has proven incapable. I'm one of Kitty IA's biggest fan, and I think in the current situation, looking at the US with Donald Trump, but also at other countries and things going on there, your work is totally on the point and opens up a very interesting discussion field. Can you tell us more about these works? But actually, I think you told me you want to talk about politics today and less about artworks. That's why I had to at least name a few. Please, Pina, the floor is yours.
I'm muted. Hi, thank you so much, Heike, for that wonderful, beautiful introduction. Yes, I will be talking about politics, but not perhaps directly, but more in terms of politics connection to decision making or executive function, or how humans make decisions in general, and how this is affecting politics. Actually, I probably was overly ambitious about my slide deck, so I'll have to perhaps skip half of them. That's what I'm realizing right now, also given the time limitations. So shall we jump right in? And if there is a problem with my sharing screen, perhaps my screen sharing, perhaps we can also quickly understand that. I'm going to play the slideshow, and then I'm going to go and share this with you. I think I'm sharing the wrong screen. Do I have screen sharing? Yes. Can you see my screen right now? Okay. Yes, all right. So I'm going to skip this part very quickly, but actually, I think for most of the works that I've been working on the last decade or something, one big question is how art transforms us, how art defines our emotions, if it can deform our behavior. So I've been approaching art kind of as a toolkit to engineer. I mean, I have to be careful using this word, but to engineer human affect and human reasoning, therefore, and also as a tool for education more than anything. It's been kind of my choice to instill a lot of knowledge or research in my work that could hopefully be unpacked by the audiences that are exposed to it. But I think the one claim that I have today that will explain both of the works that I'll be talking about is causality, and how causality is broken as of 21st century. So my understanding of art comes from actually biosemiotics, and this concept helps me a lot when I'm thinking about my art, but it also helps me a lot when I'm thinking about the species or organisms that I will be designing or envisioning. Jacob von Uexküll is the key person here, and he was a Baltic German biologist who worked in the fields of muscular psychology, animal behavior studies, and cybernetics of life, among many other things. And in this book, a foray into the world of animals and humans, he comes up with this term Umwelt, which means environment in German. But the way he uses this term Umwelt is kind of very specific, and I'd like to explain that very briefly. According to Jacob von Uexküll, and you can see his diagram next to the cover of the book, there are sense organs and effect organs, and each organism is endowed with a multitude of these, and each organism builds an Umwelt as the combination of these two organs. Now, Umwelt's notion is, of course, affecting or could be helpful in terms of designing synthetic life, but I'm not going to talk about robotics as much today. Basically, his notion of umwelt can also be called a theory of bubbles, and he describes the umwelt also as the world and that an organism inhabits. So what he basically tells us and shows us very beautifully is that you might be in the same environment, but depending on your umwelt, you will be building a completely different meaning world, hence the word biosemiotics. So we're, I'm in this room, it's, other living things, obviously there are cockroaches in the kitchen. This is my studio, by the way. But the way they perceive this world and the way I perceive this world and the way I act upon this world is very different. To better explain this, he gives this famous example of the tick. So in tick's umwelt, he says, there are basically three perception or sense organs, right, that respond to pressure so that the tick jumps and knows when it lands, right? That responds to butyric acid, which is basically the smell that mammals secrete. And tick's favorite food happens to be mammalian blood, therefore that makes sense. And temperature, which is also the temperature of mammals, the body temperature of mammals. The tick doesn't have light in his umwelt, nor does he have a sound. He doesn't hear the world. The tick doesn't appreciate a beautiful sunset because he won't be able to see it. There's no tick poetry, right? But there are other things that the tick can do. For instance, when these three markers, Uxwell calls them, are present in its environment, it takes action, right? It bites and it gets the blood it needs. And if none of these markers are present in its environment, the tick can stay dormant for up to 18 years, which when I first found out about it, I actually really appreciated that patience that the tick has. Compared to the tick, we have so many more sensory receptors, and our world is a lot richer. And our action world is a lot richer too, right? So I'm just going to quickly remind us of all the modalities that we're endowed with. And there are always this argument about how many senses we have. We're going to move over the Aristotelian 5-sense dogma, right? Perhaps we have as many senses as we have sense organs, but we have a much richer world, and we also have a much richer action world. Now, once we compare the human umwelt to tick's umwelt, then we might also start comparing these umwelts to other life forms. For instance, a whale, its sound umwelt, the way the whale builds this world is a lot different than us, right? It can hear very different frequencies, so does the elephant, right? They can also hear through very long distances. So for instance, for an elephant, it's discovered that they can hear up to 150 miles, meaning if a rain is falling on the ground, they can get those vibrations, and they can respond to sounds that are up to 4 kilometers. Whereas for us, it's about 300 meters. That's why we rely on technology so much, right? I can't just feel what's going on in LA. LA is about 4 kilometers. It's actually much more than that, but an elephant could do. Now, once we realize the actually complexity and the range of other umwelts, such as whales or elephants, then we can also understand our own impact on their umwelt better. For instance, if these creatures are such sonic creatures, what's happening to them, or how their world is changing under noise pollution in the oceans, for instance. I'm talking about whales. And then there are a lot of stimuli that we cannot perceive, right? That doesn't actually fall into our umwelt. We're blinded to them, we're deaf to them. I'm giving examples from modalities where we can't really feel them, but they exist. And climate change is one of them. Pesticides is another one. Volatile organic compounds is another one. And these are all byproducts of the technologies or lifestyles that we're creating. But because we can't immediately locate them in our umwelt, maybe it becomes also very difficult to take action on them. So in a nutshell, we can say that what falls beyond our umwelt becomes imperceptible. And I think imperceptibility is the key concept for me as an artist, because with the art that I'm working on, research-based art, I'm hoping to break this imperceptibility and bring the imperceptible to my own Umwelt and to the audience's Umwelt, right? Because there are ways to understand the world other than just an immediate sensory stimuli. A very good example that I find fascinating that shows what falls beyond our Umwelt becomes imperceptible is these Drosophila who've been genetically modified not to feel pain, which is nociception. And once the genetically modified Drosophila next to the normal Drosophila were put on hot plates, while the normal Drosophila after a certain temperature would start this dance and leave, the ones who couldn't feel pain didn't do that, and then they just burst into flames. So I'm always thinking, are we kind of like that Drosophila being blinded to all kinds of effects? Another example is these river dolphins. They don't have a very strong sense of smell, therefore they smell in the water to pretty toxic and poisoned environments, which affects their population size immensely. So if we think about causality as action reaction, and this is also a mental faculty that we develop very early on as kids. We know that there's going to be an effect when we drop the ball, right? When we shout, we're going to be getting people's attention. So we're very familiar with this Aristotelian concept of cause and effect. But as of 21st century, perhaps this causality is broken for us because our effect, the impact of our actions goes beyond our Umwelt, such as in the case of a plastic bottle, which I'm going to show in a second. So the claim is imperceptibility breaks causality, right? And now with this kind of cause and effect, we also look at temporal, very extended causalities, such as this image, which we'll see again. This is from 1950s, a lifestyle magazine. Also, the concept of a lifestyle was invented around then. You needed to live your life in style, and for that, you needed to purchase these lifestyle magazines. We see the birth of disposable plastics in this image. And I don't have a laser pointer. I don't know how to do it with this technology, but you can see that there's a child in this picture. It's actually the daughter of this nuclear family, and her face is ironically obscured by a flying piece of plastic. In the article, it claims disposable items cut down household chores. You can save up to 40 hours by using disposable plastics, and you can then use that time to do fun activities like shopping. And now, fast forward 62 years, right? It's more than that now, I guess 70 years. 62 years. Now we see this 60 years effect, and this is a poster child image for plastic pollution by Chris Jordan, and Laysan albatross that is in the process of decay, and we can see this ultimate fusion of nature and culture in its digestive tract. The Laysan albatross is dead because of the plastic pollution it ingested. So an example is basically a plastic bottle. We drink from this, then it goes somewhere, it's out of our Umwelt, right? But it does have an effect as in the form of a dead albatross chick, but all the intermediary steps are kind of missing from our Umwelt. Now the question is, maybe I should play this again. If every time we drank from a plastic bottle, which you shouldn't, by the way, because it also causes infertility, a seagull or a Laysan albatross fell onto your head, like literally every time you did that, if the causality happened in your Umwelt, immediately would be actually be consuming or using these products or using these technologies just like that. This is Almeria, the capital of greenhouse farming in Spain. This ships to entire Europe. And because of these, industry taking place there, every year about 15 whales beach out, and these numbers are increasing. They'll eventually decrease because the whale populations are decreasing. And then when they again open the digestive tracts of these whales, they have a horrible baby whale movie here. I'm going to skip this also very quickly. When they basically find these suffering animals, and after they die during autopsy, they find about 17 kilograms of plastic sheets, all kinds of other plastic debris that clogged their digestive tract. Now, this is pretty insane in terms of like a way of dying. There's a very, prolonged, salty violence happening here. Now again, think about grape tomatoes, which primarily come from greenhouse, environments. Every time you munched on a, cherry tomato, if a whale fell on your head, right, the scenario would be different. Of course, you'd be dead because it's a whale, but the impact of the actions would be more and more visible. Now, how can we bring the imperceptible back to our mouth? Actually, we try this all the time. We do this all the time. But I'm thinking that art has this really interesting and effective and transformative power to bring, the imperceptible to our Umwelt directly. I think the biggest challenge for artists and designers alike is designing experiences or changing culture, affecting impact on culture to reach a culture that has all these nice adjectives that I listed here. And I think another claim I would like to make, and a claim that keeps me going, it keeps me, waking up in the morning, is to know that culture is malleable. Culture isn't solid, it changes very dynamically, and it changes over very short periods of time, as opposed to the, evolutionary scale or the geological scale of time. Our culture shifts very quickly. We started throwaway living in 1950s, right? And in 60 years, we're surrounded by it, right? And this only takes about 60 years. I believe there are other examples. For instance, smoking was another example, which wasn't popular, but then it was made popular. And now, especially in the States, in California, it's not popular anymore. People dropped smoking. So there is a cultural reversal, and that this could happen via art. I'm going to skip all of this, and I'm going to move on to case studies, basically. And I spent 15 minutes. I have 15 minutes more. One case study is the piece that we're showing at Migros Museum under Heike's leadership and vision. I'd like to thank Migros Museum for really owning this work and, full force representing this in this very hard, strange time. So I really appreciate that. And the idea is basically creating a narrative, a fictional narrative, in which most of the threats that are happening, most of the anthropogenic impact that's already there in the environment is conveyed to us humans in a, let's say, less didactic, more accessible way. So the project and ecosystem of excess started for me around 2008 when I saw this image. Maybe it was around 2011. This is a plastic chair about 6 miles down at the bottom of the ocean. It's called the Benthic area. And what surrounds it is also plastic debris mixed with plankton, because the Benthic area is one of the parts of the ocean where a majority of plastic sinks. So this is, again, a perfect example of imperceptibility. I don't wake up and find myself at the bottom of the ocean every day. Therefore, it's very easy for me to not recognize that there is this chair waiting for me to sit on it, right? And I sat on that chair and I did a ton of research on plastic pollution, which I'm going to skip now because it will be preaching to the choir. And as of 2020, we're already very familiar with the damage done by plastics. But in a nutshell, the project takes place in one of the biggest gyres, Pacific Trash Vortex, which was discovered in 1997 by Captain Charles Moore. And the project also looks at, the cultural beginnings, the historical timeline that's out there in terms of the invention and spread of plastics. These are all images that I found in archive work I did at DuPont, and some claims, right? You'll have a greater chance to be yourself than any people in this history of civilization. So this is a claim made in 1953, and as of 2020, we had a much bigger chance to be ourselves, obviously. Now, some images of negative sublime. These are all from the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, I believe the audience can see the really intermingled and tight connection between oil and plastics. And here we also see some images of how plastics is affecting marine life. We see a war between polymers, but I thought this image was hopeful because life kind of finds a way to go around this. This is Charles Moore holding a sample from the plastic ocean. The ocean has turned into a plastic soup. This is the soup, is what he said. And starting with that moment, basically the exhibition, takes root. The question is, okay, the oceans were the primordial soup for life 3.8 billion years ago. What if life started now, just now, in our plastic-filled oceans, in our contemporary oceans? What kind of wild life forms would emerge out of that? Right, so I'm making this kind of jump. It's almost a neo-Lamarckian jump in a way, but I'm also thinking about, here's the soup, here are all the objects that I touch that are plastic since the moment I start my day. And then, bacteria emerges. This is not the bacteria that we're interested in, but I also had correspondences where, scientists such as Linda Amrell-Zettler discovered these plastics in the ocean, plastics eating bacteria or microcommunities in the ocean, but we don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Here I have to speed up a lot because I also want to talk about KTAI and politics, as I promised. There's going to be some insects that emerge out of this plastic soup, because pelagic insects is not something that we have right now, but we might have them since plastics offers them the opportunity to oviposition their eggs, right? Here's the Pacific balloon turtle that Heike mentioned. Again, marine turtles, after eating, tons of plastic balloons, which is their preferred plastics, there's studies on that. They evolved this elastic back, right? Here is some transchromic eggs of a benthic reptile that lays their eggs at the bottom of the ocean. Hence, they have the color red so that they're kind of invisible. And here is a display on basically how, after eating, again, tons and tons of plastic bottle caps, which are not easily recyclable, the birds, the marine birds that are affected, adopt the colors of these corporate brands, such as there's a Coca-Cola red bird, there's an Evian pink bird, etc. Right, so I was just basically trying to think about an ecosystem that was entirely informed by plastic, an ecosystem that could thrive in obscene amounts of plastic that we're trashing in the oceans. And I also had to think about some organs to digest this, because right now digestion is a big problem, as you've already seen in the example of the sperm whale. So I'm going to skip the details. There are kidneys that evolved, there are plastoceptors that evolved, and this is one of the versions of the very first iteration of ecosystem of excess. Now I'm going to, perhaps I'll have 5 minutes to talk about the KTAI. How is KTAI connected to ecosystem of excess? I really don't think of them as very separate, to be perfectly honest. I think the KTAI is happening as ecosystem of excess is happening as well. KTAI is a governor that takes hold of a that takes control over a European city in year 2039. And basically it's an AI, but it looks like a kitten, and it has all kinds of cool features that makes it a very desirable candidate over human politicians that we have currently. Now I'm going to skip this part too. The really cool thing about basically Kitty AI is that it can make these executive decisions for humanity, and she's very data driven in that sense. I call her she, and I've been criticized for that, but make no mistake, Kitty AI is no Alexa or Siri. And I was also really thinking about just given the global events, and I happen to be Turkish, where this person has been the president since eternity. And I've been thinking, are these people really qualified to make executive decisions in the face of climate change, in the face of acidification, in the face of all kinds of ecological collapse? Are they able to really handle all these hardcore questions? because human brain has its limit, right? There's this thing called executive control, executive function. You have to have like really good memory to remember everything. You have to be very, very solid with your thinking. And I don't think certain politicians deliver this performance, right? And I was also thinking about Gustave Le Bon and his notion of how crowds as individuals might be actually smart, but when crowds get together, they become like really dumb or stupid, or he doesn't say that directly, but devoid of reason, he says. Collective emotion takes over, he says. So the question is, do we deserve democracy as we execute it or run it right now? Capitol Hill just happened in the States, and this made me even more, like this made Gustave Le Bon even more meaningful for me, seeing all these, gremlin-like creatures who are not cute at all take over Capitol Hill and do all these kind of primate displays of power. And then, there is a connection between politics and decision-making, and there's a tight connection between decision-making and emotion. But currently, one of the biggest questions or one of the biggest fears we have of machines or robots or AI that is to come is that they won't have empathy. They'll hate us, although they don't have hate. They won't love us, right? Because they can't. Now, with Kitty AI, also considering the tight connection between having emotions, having emotional processing systems, and the ability to make, decisions. This has been proven by, I don't know, about a dozen big name neuroscientists, but this is also a fact we accept right now. No emotion, no decision making. If we are to make an AI that will help us with our politics or decision making at large, this AI has to have affect. Right now, Kitty AI does have affect, luckily. So for beginners, in a nutshell, Kitty AI is the state, right? It's basically, it pops up in EU. I thought about the United States, and then I was like, no, it's going to take them a lot longer. It can live on your phone, so you can actually chat with Kitty AI pretty much every time. It's there for you when you want to chat with it or when you want to talk about a problem. It has a large database where she can store up to 3 million people with their chats, like their heart rate monitoring, if it's translated to her, where they live, where they're going, the activities, all of it can be stored and processed into decision making. And it's actually just a friendly, innocent face, right? You can trust Kitty AI. It's an example of applied microdemocracy. What does this mean? For Kitty AI to take action, all it takes is a lot of people chatting about the same subject, creating heat maps about issues, and Kitty AI will pay attention. For instance, if there's a hole in the ground and a car falls into it, if the citizens start texting or communicating with Kitty AI, and if there's an enough number of response, Kitty AI will look into that. We can discuss the negative sides to this later when we have time, but I'm just going to skip to the difference between applied microdemocracy and abstract macrodemocracy, where you choose a person and the decisions that they make for the decisions to be applied, it takes a long time. It also takes a very long time to get rid of them if you're not happy with them, as seen in the example of Trump. So it's a network intelligence, meaning it doesn't do everything on itself. There are other kittens or felines or species that help Kitty AI. For instance, Lucifer takes care of immigration in Europe, which is also a very tricky subject. SDCN takes care of transportation and smart cars, yada, yada. Here's a very quick comparison of Kitty AI with Donald Trump, who's not luckily here, who's not going to be effective anymore. But Kitty AI, obviously, just looking at this chart, wins. Right, it can speak any language that its citizens speak in its database. It offers two-sided communication, whereas the typical politician would tweet and then they would never reply to your tweet if you tweet to them. TI is always there for you. It's very attentive. It's always ready. Most importantly, it looks like a kitten. Now I'm going to skip the second chart, and to do that, I'll do this. Some fashion shoots of Kitty AI. Here she is in the parliament, and here she's talking to Obama, checking in. Here she is having some discussions with Vladimir Putin. This is actually my favorite image of all the ensemble. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to play an excerpt from the movie, but basically Kitty AI is a new model of democracy where an AI with the affective capacities of a kitten can respond to the needs. That's where I'm going to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pina. That was wonderful. I would have loved to hear more. I'm still, it's funny. I mean, you brought in the end the cat and its affected need and especially also the comparison with Trump. So I'm still thinking about what are you envisioning Kitty's future in a different way still? I mean, can you envision that there will be the kitten will be a vice president in the future? Well, it might be more clever than a president.
Perhaps, actually, I mean, just like how ideas pop in culture, there were other instances of an AI governor president that I've been seeing, especially with speculative fiction. And I was just also seeing, I'm blanking on the name of the TV show now, an American TV show where there is an AI president and there is a human president. So you can also go talk to the AI president, and their depiction was hilarious because it was just the blinking lights as opposed to all the facial gestures, etc. So I do think we already use AI in so many different applications, but I do believe we will be benefiting from the data processing power. I think for me, the more I work on this project, the more it becomes clear to me. I think I felt a need for innocence in leadership, total dedication. And I just found, having an AI whose goal is literally to love, as much as a machine can love, and we don't know how they can, but perhaps they can. Yeah, and care.
Yvonne Volkart today talked about the care society. So it's like the Kitty IA could be also a caring person, not a person. No, sorry, a caring IA, which is dealing better with many.
Exactly. I'm sorry I missed Yvonne's talk. It was at 4 a.m.
I know, for
so
you
I just
possible.
couldn't get up for that, but I'm going to watch it retroactively. But yes, indeed. And there is also all kinds of, human logical fallacies and human biases. It's proven that, human behavior is affected by so many different parameters. So if an entity like this wouldn't have, for instance, material desires, right, wouldn't be perhaps corrupted by power, perhaps it wouldn't be, it wouldn't feel the need to display their strength to other people, etc. So I think there is a lot that can be gained, but also I think right now with the severity of issues that's facing us, I think we need any solution that's out there to help us. So I am very curious to see how AI will, take the form of, executive decision maker in politics and in governance. Politics maybe not the right word, but in governance for sure.
So I have one last question before Gözde will also ask Marcus Hall, and then we will open up to the public and the questions who came in. I still love the turtle in this, but I'm kind of mixed about, because it's like, in a way, it's also it's adaptation in a very classic way to your ambient, but right. Actually you have creativity in mind. It's like being flexible and be creative and responsive.
Right.
And I'm kind of twisted between, like, is it just adoption? But you're much more clever than that.
Well, to be perfectly honest, Heike, it's a very dark picture we're looking at when we think about the oceans. When I started working on this project, I don't think it was this bad, but every year, you know, the amount of microplastics is increasing. We are making positive steps. We are making huge steps towards a positive future, but it's also very clear that a total collapse of certain ecosystems might actually happen. So, and given how it takes a very long time for evolution to, you know, come up with a new species or organism, I was very conflicted with this project myself. But I just thought that speculating about new life forms in kind of an indefinite time could be a good way to talk about our current position, our current situation. So I'm aware of that. Yes, I'm aware that, and also, like, we don't even understand how evolution works perfectly. There are different theories. Some people say there's a gradual, change, and it takes a very long time. And some people, like Jay Good, would say, oh no, it's I think it's called punctuated evolution, where there's a jump and then a new species emerge. And given the composition of plastics, how would it even be possible to really metabolize that, right? Like, what's the caloric value? How do you metabolize something as noxious as plastics, especially if it's full of chemicals like BPAs, phthalates, etc. So currently I'm working on another project where I have a speculative scenario of vultures who can actually digest plastics, and their gut biome has been modified. So I was just thinking, maybe there's a way, because at the end of the day, it's a polymer chain. It could be broken down. It's carbon based, it's oil, right? So maybe there's a way, was kind of how I kept going. But again, to this day, I'm aware that there's this kind of, there's a conflict in there. Because I like the actual marine turtles a lot better than the Pacific balloon turtle. I think if I had to choose, I would definitely choose the one that's already here with us, or has been here much longer than humans.
Thank you. I have to pass over to Gözde.
Thank you, Heike.
Thank you both. Actually, when we come to the hybrid species that Pinar is imagining what could possibly come out of this ruined ecosystems, let's say, it reminds me back to Marcus's thought, because in Marcus's talk, he talks about restoration versus rewilding. Mm-hmm. And restoration is to bring back a certain landscape or an ecology, right? Please correct me, Marcus, back to how it was. So in restoration, they take a certain time period, and it depends mm-hmm. on every researcher, every manager, which period to be taken to. And then they try to recreate that old time before it was ruined. Versus the rewilding, where the past is not something they take reference from. They take the current situation, even if it's ruined, and try to imagine a wilderness to be created by human intervention. And in this, Marcus thinks, as I understood, it can be dangerous. It's fun to watch me summarize. It can be dangerous that through this rewilding, if it's not done cautiously, certain species can emerge in a point where in the long run it can be on the contrary effect. I'm not going to say harmful, but it can get out of hand. I think it's kind of like this not foreseeing what could happen in rewilding. Mm-hmm. And can you maybe I made a connection kind of with this hybrid imaginary species that could emerge, one under Pinar's imagination, but one is under, I think, spontaneously, if rewilders do not take caution or What do you say, Marcus?
Yeah, Gözde, I think you did a good summary from what I can interpret of these different areas. I think there's a bit of overlap with Pinar's study, and so that this issue of rewilding does have to build on our own beliefs and biases, and so that we can't really escape the history that we all have embedded within us. So we think we're sallying off into new territory to create these ideal states, but we always are sort of linked or anchored to our past. But yeah, that's absolutely right. Restoration generally is backward looking, and rewilding is forward looking. And in fact, restoration, for the most part, is a little bit of an old school project, which was really popular 30, 40 years ago and sort of rose. And then people began to realize, or began to try to do it. And they said, well, everything's changed. The climate's changed. The species composition has changed. We can't come back. We have to produce something in our mind, which is better. And of course, that's where the problems come up. You know, and if you're trying to remove plastic from the oceans, that's certainly part of the restoration, going back to a state which was more pristine. But is it possible? Are those particles always going to be there no matter what? Can you then do something to the ocean which makes it a better than it is now, but it's probably not going to be what it was 30, 50 or pre-plastic age. So yeah, and then the question of, you know, can you create a machine that does better than what humans can do, like the kitty AI, put the kitty AI, sick the kitty onto a restoration project or a rewilding project, and you may have a more perfect world. But I guess my question to Pinar is then, it's the biases, it's the all of the terrible things that are so embedded in human nature that make people like Donald Trump so popular. Obviously, I mean, clearly the biases and the terrible things that he represents, I think a lot of people have been able to latch onto those and to project him to the position of power that he is. So it's those non-AI attributes that are
right
with us.
Right. I think I've been thinking about this a lot, because I think fanaticism is something that always baffles me. Again, I grew up in Turkey, and the first thing I witnessed was, you know, football, soccer, they call it soccer here, and how like fanatics would just paint their faces and go out there, and like if the team, you know, if their team loses, like some people even would commit suicide, or I know, shoot someone else. And even as a kid, I remember finding this really extreme, right? And we can see the same type of behavior in politics as well, like this kind of the tribal approach, right? And I think my solution to that was to present Kitty AI as a friend. It's your friend. It's there on your phone, and it knows about you, and it's checking on you. So I was really trying to hijack this kind of fanaticism, which could also, people could go, you know, build something else, and then they could say, we don't like cats. Here's the dog AI, and that's what I'm going to vote for, of course. But I was just hoping that by becoming a member of everybody's small tribe, the AI can actually stand a chance against our innate fear towards, you know, the unknown, because there is also a lot of, how to say it, negative image around AI and, you know, robots taking over, etc., like Terminator, right? So there's also that. How do we open people's minds and hearts to new technologies that are actually perhaps benign? But can technology ever be benign? So that's the bigger question. And I caught, you know, your talk about using AI in, you know, these restoration or rewilding projects. I think, as I said earlier, we need any tool that's available to us to help us make better in like well-informed questions. But as we're seeing with other applications of AI, such as facial recognition, how AI could be trained as racist, it could also go really wrong. So this will involve a lot of thoughtful research and a lot of thinking before we start training, or as we, you know, conceive these thinking systems. I call an AI a thinking system.
I would like to pinpoint a difference maybe in using an AI for politics and, let's say, human population management versus AI in an environment or ecological management is when an AI is integrated put into communication with humans, it knows how to read humans because it's already made by humans to understand humans. But whereas in the AI of environmental, let's say it's not restoration, but rewilding, will it know how to understand the tree? Will it know how to communicate with a tree so that it will understand what it needs? Basically, when I think about it, will think a tree needs from what we put in that data, right? We will tell what a tree needs based on the data we have. So maybe an AI for the environmental rewilding, it has to be something that can communicate with non-humans so that it can also respond to their needs as well. Can be a different type of AIs, I would imagine.
Right, I completely agree with you. And I think it takes us back to Jacob von Uexküll's notion of Umwelt. Perhaps their, input, output, or their mark, I think it's called, markers, mark organs, action organs, and sense organs could be designed that are completely in a non-human way. So I think we will be coming back to this Umwelt notion a lot in the following years as well, to understand ecosystem damage and also to find cures or to find solutions.
And coming back to final time to Marcus's talk, I have another question for you, and then we can start taking questions from the audience. In your example of Robert Smithson's earth art curation, both in the United States and the Netherlands, we see the difference that in United States, they decided to let it be, and in Netherlands, they decide to intervene directly for the sake of the art piece to stay as it was, intervening the environment completely. And well, these are landscape managers, I would assume, and the government. So there's not really an artistic or art curation, I would imagine, more of a political, environmental management. But as you position curators as actors aware of their subjectivity and decision, what is it that you wish the landscape manager learned from the curators? And which curator? The curator in USA, which left the landscape be, or the curator in Netherlands who decided, yes, let's intervene this environment and keep the art piece as is? Which curator, the landscape manager or the environmental rewilders, should be taking as an example?
Yeah, those are, I'll poke at an answer here. I really think that curation, like rewilding, then is left up to a great deal of interpretation according to the needs of the interpreter and the public that is going to be viewing this landscape or art. And at least in the North American case, the mythic understanding of the landscape is it's a place that's untouched, and that somehow Europeans arrived, or even if the indigenous people were there, there was this initial untouched space. And so it's much more accepted to leave this untouched and to let this be sort of an artistic object in a wilderness. Whereas in the Dutch case, there's so much more attention to manicured landscapes, and a fourth of the country is, of course, won back from the sea to begin with. So it's already an artificial place. And so the mythic sense in the Dutch case, I think, is certainly to manipulate and change and modify actively if needed. So it has to do with people looking at landscapes and seeing what they think the landscape should be or was, and whether that's true or not. I don't think that's really important. It's that's their vision. That's the story that they tell. But what can landscape managers tell the curators, or vice versa? And I think largely it's that it's a very subjective process, and that you have to accept that it's subjective and celebrate that subjectivity. So it's this, I think, sort of the false attempt towards objectivity and create the perfect whatever it is the problem there. And then it'll depend on your generation, depend on the curator, depend on the landscape, and you have to make those individual decisions. And I would think, you know, I really think the Kitty AI is a great sort of project to think about, because it's really, I assume that this is a self-correcting Kitty AI, one that can figure out the biases, and then I think what you've described, Pinar, is basically Twitter feed, right in your Kitty AI, so you can create these echo chambers where you need to, and dissolve those and go on to a bigger sort of project if you need to. I think you just described with a Kitty AI what we do with social media all the time. But yeah, I think there's a lot of applications. But on the other hand, historians attempt for an objective. Well, they see something happening in the past, and they say, how can we interpret those facts, those actual occurrences, the Procrustean occurrences, and to see what we can, how we can interpret those stories. So it's again, you're torn between sort of the hard ecology, the food webs that are actually out there, and the fact that there are certain, wouldn't call them laws of nature, but there are certain, there is a nature apart from humans, but then humans have to then learn to live in this nature and get along with it. And so I don't think we can lose fact that there's both a nature, and then a nature apart from humans, and then the humans which are always part of nature, and then trying to change it to the best possible. But
so kind of being aware of their own position, how they have the power to intervene, and maybe taking responsibility, or being aware of this subjectivity affects their decision. I remember you talking about that with you, like the curators, you would assume, are aware of their subjectivity and use it consciously to do their work. And you wish that that was also the thing in landscape management, where they are also, don't assume they're objective, but be aware of their subjectivity in intervening these ecosystems and management.
yeah, I mean, they said it back in the 70s, we are as gods and may as well get good at it. I really think that's, well, we're not gods, but we better get good at whatever we're doing. Yeah, I think it's really paramount that we try to do our best, but continually have there's this ego that sits outside and tells us that we're maybe doing something wrong. Maybe that's the Kitty IA and the whole AI, which is part of the equation here. But yeah, those are some ideas.
Thank you. Maybe we take some questions from the audience. We have 2 people joining in the videos and more questions in the Q&A.
I invited Matteo, he's already here, as he had some questions for Marcus and Pinar, and maybe also for Yvonne. Maybe she will come back to us, but yes. Matteo.
Yeah, hi again, everybody. Yeah, maybe I start with Marcus. I was wondering, what would you say, where does the human stay, or where are we positioned if we start using this artificial or automated wilding, rewilding processes? Because on one side, I was thinking of it as kind of like becoming a proxy for humanity. Like, instead of us actually doing the manual labor and being there, it's only these things going around and seeding around. But at the same time, I also started thinking about the Subak irrigation system in Bali, that is at the same time also like it is multiple calendar that functions as some form of an island-wide computer that controls or shapes or gives a rhythm to local life throughout the year, including the culture, the traditions, certain festivities, etc. So yeah, it also goes a bit into what I was asking Yvonne earlier about where's this difference between nature and technology, and where start these things to merge, and can we really step out, or are we becoming, or are the things that are becoming proxy, or is that even a possibility? And maybe also the Kitty AI could be an example for such an intelligence or entity that would be such a proxy.
Yeah, no, I think it requires continual feedback so that you have your cultural norms and your things, that the way you understand the natural world, and you have to see if they're aligning to what you observe, what you're seeing in the natural world. And certainly some of the myths that we grow up with then have to evolve, they have to change through time, and those will change according to all the needs that we can recognize. New plastics in the environment, or new viruses in the environment, things like that. So we have to, so it's this feedback where you have to have back, the nature culture feedback has to really be, has to be present. On the other hand, you have to make room for tradition, right? So that there's tradition, and so that how your for mothers, fathers interpreted nature, then you have to respect that and see where they're coming from, and attempt to incorporate that into your own worldview. It's a really good question. How do you deal with a traditional society that has been doing really well, but then is somehow surrounded now by the quote Western world and the capitalist scene, which we have to confront all the time, so that there has to be some sort of hybrid lifestyles that are continually evolving, and then sort of check and balances to see if those can survive and if those can be wholesome through time. We really can't be static. I guess that's the quick answer. We can't have a worldview and say that's it. It has to continually change.
Cool, thank you. Maybe now to the question that I have for Pinar. I was wondering a bit about the cuteness of the Kitty AI, because recently, for random reasons, as always, I was reading into Joshua Paul Dale's evolutionary theory of cuteness, that also plays into Jakob von Uexküll's subjectivity, or element of subjectivity in evolution, as certain animals throughout the millennia willingly approaching humanity, and especially those individuals that were what we call now cute, like the big eyes, large ears, and yeah, whether that was something that the Kitty AI developed for itself, so to speak, but at the same time, that's also something that determines the Kitty AI as being something maybe anthropocentric in a certain way, or human focused. So in addition to that, I would also like to ask you whether there are other interfaces that are thought for other entities.
You, Matteo, these are really good questions, and I think that also perhaps connects to the future of this project, because it's an ongoing project, and there are definitely requests for different interfaces for Kitty AI. Some people, want their own pet to become the face of the AI. It's just like, you have Alexa's voice, and if you're thinking of her, oh, this is so like sexist, white, blah, blah. I wish it had like now they're coming up with different, voices for these Internet of Things devices, etc. But starting off, I really didn't want to have a human face, because there's a lot of studies that show our racial biases taking place immediately, even if we wouldn't be considered something. There is a preference to perhaps feel more confident in the presence of people who are like us, as opposed to people who are not like us. And there's studies that show this. That was one thing. I needed to find a generic, let's say, a non-human kind of look for this. About cuteness, the most I think commonly referenced article is that babies and baby animals and all of that look cute. Therefore, they have big eyes and they have like round cheeks and they make cute sounds. Therefore, we're programmed to just actually take care of them. And that's why cuteness is there. But then I've been reading about this in Robert Sapolsky's Behave, which is a colossal book. And I made it to page 400. Yay, it's an 800-page book where he shows us that there's infanticide in, a bunch of primates and lions, and the babies they kill are also cute. So perhaps cuteness isn't very well explained at this point. But I was also, taking the role of an experienced designer, and I know that cuteness works in our current culture. So I thought, okay, this works, so we can choose this. But when I think about this, I think perhaps it was also a search for innocence. I was thinking about, some character between Dalai Lama, where it's the chosen one, but it's a child, right? So there's the innocence that comes with being a child, not having, for instance, you wouldn't expect a cute kitten to be in the middle of a sex scandal, right? You wouldn't expect them to just like be driving a Maserati because that's, they want to show off what they have. It's kind of like their fitness marker. So I was going for this, and I was also feeling this need at a kind of universal level. We have lost our social trust, especially in countries like where I came from. We lost our trust in people who are leading us, right? There were some moments in some people that were trusted, etc. But currently, this is kind of a social trust issue. And I was thinking about, okay, so what are some elements, and how can we design a character that will actually that will be easier to trust because their looks are there. And there's a ton of bias in how people look and their success as well. There's research on this. So I was just looking at all kinds of different pictures out there from basically contemporary cognitive psychology and some behavior research. And but I really like the idea of having different interfaces for this entity. But again, then the scenario will get really complicated because it can easily create camps, right? So I was just now going with this look, but stay tuned.
Maybe Kitty AI can transform into something else slowly, and we can witness this change. So it's the same entity, can be a nice thing.
Or you can swipe left. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, you can choose, but the transformation is also helps people to understand that it's the same entity. It takes time for people to make a connection of it's the same person with many things. Also, I want to comment that when you said there's a missing point between cause and effect, there was this wording you were using, but it also reminded me of absent reference. It's another discourse about meat eating and feminism, and it's a word used in Carol Adams' Sexual Politics of Meat, which is the thing I'm recently reading. And there's this thing called absent reference, where we cannot make the connection between the meat we eat and the animals because there's a connection missing. It reminded me of that, how we skip parts. We can't make the perception of between what we do and the end result. It reminded me of that. So now we actually finished our open forum, and now this is we name it differently. It's an open conversation now. Whoever would like to join, anyone from the participants are welcome to join. You don't have to have questions. You can just come to see us, meet us, say hello. This is very free zone, and we still have questions which we can address with Nuria. But I also want to say, if participants wants to meet with some of the speakers and say something, please send us a request and we'll invite you. And Federico, maybe you open your video too, so we're more. So Nuria?
I think Yvonne would like to say something.
Well, maybe to open this up, I have to say I'm really charmed. It was the word is charming how your discussion was now also about these queer ideas about AI in maybe as means for empathic approaches and making the world better also, because I mean I am more a skeptic also towards the actual hype towards artificial intelligence, and I always thought, for me our talk is totally interesting now more as a hypothesis, as some fiction, as a vision how it could be, because I think we should not forget that believing in technology is usually the normal thing people want, how they want to solve complex problems, and they do it now with AI, and we all know how AIs are trained and so on. So I'm a little bit skeptical, but I like the talk.
So we have some questions in the Q&A.
Yes, there is 2 more questions.
One I answered, so it's in the answered now. So it's 3. I don't want to skip any.
3, yeah. Maybe I start with this one. That's only a short one. Where is it? There is it. It's a question to Marcus Hall. I would like to ask, what is the state of land art today? Are there contemporary artists still doing land art?
Actually, I took her to invited her as video. Maybe she will open her video. Müge?
Yeah, I am here, if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you see me?
No.
No, not yet. Is your video on?
Yeah. I was on Zoom all day. But video, it might be because I was on another program all day. So probably I need to reset my...
Well, that's okay.
It's okay. I will just...
Yeah.
So my question is, that's it. I've been really looking into land art recently a lot, because my question is actually incomplete, because my question is actually indeed from a feminist point of view, because we have really good artists in the history, especially in the 70s, who worked with land, directly in contact with nature. And I know how much it's connected also indeed to the commission from governments and municipalities, gemeentes. I'm currently based in the Netherlands, so I'm really interested in the tradition of the land art. But who are the contemporary artists? Who are people of 30, 40 years old, 20 years old, who are working in the field, if you know?
Yeah, no, these are great questions. The earth art movement is considered a historic movement, as you probably know. And so it supposedly had a beginning and an end. And it was a group of mostly Americans, apparently, working in the 70s. And then there are some ongoing projects of earth art, but it's mostly in Western United States. But you can certainly see that there's connections to all of the amazing I don't know the artists, but people who were doing obviously earth art type projects. And so someone is, the art historian, there's a project there waiting to make those connections between the 70s movement and what happened by the 80s. But I think the earth art movement must be connected to sort of the whole period in the late 60s and early 70s where there's a a sensitivity to environmentalism and a sensitivity to land, the whole Rachel Carson, sort of post-Rachel Carson, ban pesticides. What's interesting, I think, about the Earth Art movement is exactly right. They were able to get permission to go out and place these very large objects on places and art and landscapes, which I don't think they get permission from the authorities to do that anymore, because these are such obtrusive places. And so the Earth Art movement itself has become a historic movement. And then there's this preservationist notion that we have to preserve this movement of 40, 50 years ago, even though a lot of what they're doing now could be echoes of the Earth Art movement. I think there's a really good history project waiting to make those connections between then and now.
It would be interesting to look at how the governments and states would react to such efforts if it happened today. Yeah. I would say it's maybe, I'm not so familiar with Western America, North American region, but I would say landscape and all these fields are under more control, and they're very sensitive to all types of anti-state actions. So I would say it wouldn't be that inviting or supported by the states or governments if one wants to make a land art. And it also reminded me recently, again in Western North America, there was an art, I wouldn't say art event, an open air art event. So, but not land art, but it was interesting to see. It happened in the desert, I think. I can't recall the name, but yeah, I think it would be a nice research topic to see and imagine what would happen. Maybe there are some artists who are still doing it, but I haven't heard actually.
And the Earth Art projects themselves have some of them become very controversial, and so they've been, you know, some there's supporters that these need to be preserved and protected. And then there's others who say, well, this is really an intrusion on the landscape and they have to be erased and obliterated. So I think that controversy is still ongoing.
Yes. Also, like in Robert Smithson's, how the climate crisis is visible through these earth arts, how it's not visible because it's underwater right now, and how it was visible in the past. And it's can be a great research. Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you for the answers. Yeah, of course, I'll be here.
Pinar sent a land
I put
artist.
Mary Mattingly. It's the young people making work that is definitely taking over a huge, you know, role in terms of redefining urban environment. That's another thing I've been thinking myself, like right now, because our wealth is dominated by man-made environments and urban environments. So perhaps the land art, the contemporary practitioners are actually here, but they are now in this other landscape, which we forget is a landscape.
Nuria, maybe we directly invite people to ask their own questions.
Yeah, maybe. A question that just came to my mind is from Gregor Vogel. He asks, Pinar mentioned the possibility and thus perhaps responsibility of art to speak political change, to spark political change. In Zurich, it seems like the majority of the young art scene is almost radically unpolitical. How can this be changed?
Well, I'm doing my part by teaching in the university and showing them all kinds of exciting work and being like, hey guys, there's so much work to do, come join. But I honestly think that this is a huge problem. And I would like more people to be inspired and to be bold enough to actually tackle these issues, because art gives us this very unique freedom in terms of doing research and, you know, putting out an expressive, affective entity. And I think art is a wonderful platform to raise questions about I don't know, eco-destruction or, you know, AI or all the new technologies that are coming upon us. So I think I see the problem myself, and I am sometimes really appalled by the fact that there is only a handful of people who are actively really pursuing projects that are political in nature.
Thank you. Is from the ones that just joined us, maybe someone would like to unmute themselves and ask the question they wrote.
Do you want to address who? Noria, maybe Gregor, or we had Maria. She had two questions.
Yes, Maria had
Hi,
few
Maria.
questions.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for these wonderful contributions and everything. And I will be really fast because I'm in a common room and there's another video conference starting in a few minutes just behind me, so I can't be disturbing. I just wanted to ask, especially Pinar, I was in a discussion some time ago, and I almost had a serious argument with someone who was claiming that AI can as effectively as humans create art. I had some serious arguments against that, and I just wanted to hear your view on it.
Sure, actually, this is something that comes up as well because I find myself in these AI exhibitions, and mine is the only one that's basically looking at a different picture as opposed to using GANs or whatever, you know, AI model is out there to create interesting imagery. What we have right now is nowhere near, you know, the human creativity, in my opinion, because currently the versions of AI we have are, I would say, very primitive. And as I'm trying to, you know, push in the Kitty AI project, affect is missing, right? So there's no emotional processing. But then that brings us to another question: can emotions actually exist in a body without organs, right? Because there's always this kind of brain in a vet idea, right? Like this abstraction of human thought and talent from the human bodily experience. And I'm not convinced that a creature who can't feel pain or a creature who can't feel pleasure, very simple pain and pleasure, as you know, positive and negative, will actually have an emotional system that will work accordingly. So art is very complex. It involves motor skill. It involves, you know, sensory input. It involves a very keen eye or, you know, ear for specific resonances and waveforms, right? And artists actually do a lot of hardcore processing that can't be put into words. So AI is nowhere near that. I mean, that's why I thought a cat makes sense, because at least, you know, a cat doesn't have as big of a prefrontal cortex as we do, right? They're still admirable, wonderful beings, but there's no AI that is also able to approach the brilliance of a cat at this point. So my take on AI art, when they feed AI with a bunch of Rembrandt and there's a new Rembrandt painting, yes, it's interesting. And this is a good test. This is a good experiment. We're learning AI and we're using this. Or you feed a bunch of videos and it turns from flower to cat to whatever. It's interesting to look at, but I don't know. I'm not going to say it's not art, because it's obviously art, because anything can be art. That's the universal rule of contemporary, you know, art world. We learned this, but it's still so far from the human creativity and the human talent and skill and human empathy and human thought and all of those things that lead to brilliant artworks. So in short, yes, they could, you know, you can say AI creates art and we can embrace their creativity, but long answer is, I mean, it's nowhere near an actual, you know, human artist.
Thank you very much.
There is a question from Laura still in the chat. Maybe Laura would like to ask the question, or I will just read it out loud. Laura wrote, I am wondering if the topics that have been touched upon could end up in a perhaps more general question of accessibility and authority, both taking into consideration the location of some of those interventions and the imposition of the role of the curator. Here I am thinking specifically about the work of Robert Smithson, who seemed to make things difficult to reach and intervene on. When it comes to land art, I believe accessibility is often a big issue and big revealing element that connects memories, past and present, with perhaps allusions to the future. So where does preservation, restoration ends, and where does the curatorial ego comes in? How does that relation impact our Umwelt or vice versa?
I assume that's a question for me, but yeah, this is really dealing with the issue of hubris, I think. And I think it's, again, inevitable that the curator doesn't put themselves into the picture, but then that curator then becomes like an artist and then has to do that and make the calls in such a way that he or she's sensitive to what needs to be done, to what extent they're putting themselves into the project themselves, into the art project. I think accessibility was also part of the Earth Art project, so that we see these pictures, even the plastic swirl in the middle of the Atlantic and the Pacific and the Indian Oceans. We've never experienced those ourselves. We have to see those through photographs. And maybe it's the distance, the fact that this is out there somewhere, but that we can't touch it ourselves, makes it more important to us, and adds to the mystique of the art piece. I think part of Smithson's work, where the spiral jetty then was sunk below the surface, certainly added to the fame of the project, so that there was this art, but you couldn't see it. It was under the water, it was gone. And so then people began to build on, in their own minds, what this project was or is or would be. So certainly the element of distance and opacity helped promote the project, certainly. And then whether that should be the case, whether these are ecologists out producing wild landscapes, whether we can access those wild landscapes or not, may add to the mystique. We all know that the Antarctic is out there and it's a wild place, but most of us will never go there. So maybe that adds to the power of the place, that allows us to appreciate it even more. So yeah, there's embedded questions in that, and several in that single question. But I guess what I
want to add
is how this is overlapping with the whole artificial intelligence question. I mean, there's so much here that overlaps.
I want to add that in the land art movement, they were actually criticizing the commerciality of art, and actually how it should be out of the institution and in the land. So, and it's something that cannot be sold or replaced because it's land art. So that's one of the reasons, maybe that's why it's happening like it in the land, and how it creates this maybe unreachability. Maybe they didn't intend it for such a thing, but working with land and finding the land that they can work with created that. But also in terms, I think that was a really good question about authority. It makes me remember like the old artworks, and the authority is in the institution or the collection owner, whether to restore it or not. Whereas in the land art, as I saw, thanks to you in the Netherlands, Robert Smithson's work were restored by the government directly. So the authority is the one who holds it, or it's very diverse. It's a very good question, actually, but it's very, very similar to the restoration of an artwork in an institution based on their interest. And I'm sure there are some artworks who are not restored, who is forgotten. Which ones are forgotten? Probably the ones maybe who don't bring monetary interest, which is not so popular, so they don't even put effort to restore it. And I'm sure that also happens in a landscape. If a landscape is not so profitable to a government or a state, they don't put the effort to put effort in that to restore or rewild that land, all these forgotten landscapes, which goes to the rewilders of the ones who defend no human. I'm sure they like that the governments don't restore this area, so it becomes wild on its own.
Yeah, I'm unsure of the status of the Broken Circle Spiral Hill project, but I believe that's on private land, and people, I think, have to pay to go see that. And so that's also, so there's some democratic questions that that come up, again, in the transatlantic divide, but that's certainly part of the equation of who's to appreciate this, who's to take care of it, what's the curator's role. And so.
There's one last question in the Q&A. Do we have time for this? Are you still?
Maybe is it our last question? We have.
Matteo just wrote. There was another one from G. Hall.
Gregor. No, that's someone else. Okay.
Gregor we already read this. That was about the young art scene. It's a question for.
Would you like to come as video for the final time before we end? No.
Yeah.
Hi.
I really enjoyed today. Thank you. I just wanted to ask Pinar about her thoughts on the impact on political ideas that you're thinking about, particularly from the perspective of a woman, and how you understand these thoughts around respect and care and love that you spoke about in your presentation, and how maybe this is important thinking in a world designed for men, arguably. And yeah, just interested about these ideas. Thank you.
Was that a question about Kitty AI?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, did you hear me?
So no, it's fine. Thank you. Thank you for this beautiful question. Yes, I was, when I started looking for a voice for this entity and face and how it's going to be represented, and what it symbolizes, all of that, I immediately went for, again, a child's voice, but then I call Kitty AI a she. And in some of the panels or talks I give, people criticize that it's just reinforcing this idea of, all these assistants, electronic assistants or AI assistants that we have, and how they're always represented with this kind of a very specific female voice that belongs to a very specific age group, right? You don't hear your grandmother telling you, would you like to, hear about your latest delivery or something. It's pretty specific what kind of voices these have. So I'm pretty aware of that. And I wasn't really trying to replicate that approach with Kitty AI, but I hope that, because this is a speculative project, and most things around us used to be speculative at one point in time. So if Kitty AI is realized, I just kind of thought that this would be a very, how to say it, queer, gender aware entity. And my choice using the she pronoun for the Kitty AI. And I have to highlight another thing. In my mother tongue, we don't have pronouns for male, female entities. It's just one thing. We call everything it. So there you don't instantly just think about the gender of a person or a table or a chair. There's no such thing in my, mother tongue. So I was kind of going for that, but then I was like, if I'm going to use a pronoun, I'll use she, because obviously, we want more female politicians, we want more representation, and we want this kind of, culture that I just criticized about, for instance, disposable consumerism to go away, because we have been in this culture for a long time, and we know the problems it caused us. So this is a change for a huge cultural transformation and change. And I think it's only possible by, having more female or women voices in a high-level decision-making, systems. So that's why I was always calling her she, and that's why I still use, I would say, a neutral voice for it, because it's the kid's voice. But that's very important to me, that we also emphasize this aspect. And also in building technology, I do hope this will change, but 20 years ago, when I was learning programming for the first time, when I was like trying to get into this hacker culture or coding, because I was fascinated by technology at that point, I was trying to learn it. There was a strong bias against women, and against, women wanting to do math or wanting to do coding. And I think it's changed a lot right now, but I'm hoping that it'll change a lot more. And we won't even be thinking about these questions or issues in like 15 years.
I would like to comment on that, because in the summer, I was in a project about like internet art and AI. And then that time I realized, yes, AI algorithms that are used by big companies, and mostly majority of men are running these companies, such as Microsoft, Google, especially in their coding departments, it's mostly men. There was an argument where a Google coder said women cannot code, which Google had to sue him. There was a huge argument. And I realized it is not a coincidence that AI algorithms that we're using have female attributions, including the Japanese, was it Sophia? That wasn't Japanese, but there was a Japanese company did also a robot. The first robot is Sophie, which is a female. And all these female attributions are not a coincidence. We can put it in the context, but there's a difference between Kitty AI, where Kitty AI is not for the use of humanity. It is a suggestion for a future. So I think it's very feminist. I like it. I don't think it's in the same box where I use Siri, or where these female robots in the media, in TV shows come and talk for humanity by a male companion who did the coding, run by a male-run company. So there's a huge difference, I would say.
Yeah, I think to add to that goes another, pop culture reference could be this movie, Her, by Spike Jonze. It's her, and it's, the sexy voice of, who's that actress? She's also in Avengers, and Scarlett Johansson. And it's this kind of, flirt between this male protagonist and a female voice, right? I've always thought that movie was a good movie, compared to a lot of other AI movies out there. But like, what if the protagonist was a female and it was a male voice? Would the movie actually have the same effect? So this is kind of, even for us who are very aware of these biases, it's ingrained in us. And I'm just really hoping that this gender oppression is going to be a thing of the past, just like a lot of other toxic cultural diseases that we're fighting against right now, like racism, or even certain, expressions of religion. I just hope that it's high time we move past this.
Yes, and I think it's completely okay, and we should use more woman, let's say, agency because also you're a woman, so it's coming from you in more future imaginary scenarios in whatever way possible. I defend that. I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, I mean, as the last thing, if we're designing a character that's going to save the world, I want that character not to be a man for once.
Me too. We are all filled with that anyway. And I think we have the creativity to find very creative solutions and creative imaginary futures, hybrids, beasts, women, everything. It's, as long as we want to get out of that box. We have the final question, and then we are ending because we're all very tired. Matteo,
Yes.
would you like to open your video and ask your question?
I did not have a question left.
Hello,
Another
I'm Matteo. There is another one. Hi there. Yeah, thanks everyone for the great symposium. I really enjoyed it. And I have a question for Pinar and Yoldes. So in a way, when I think of AI, I immediately kind of think of a programmer that is actually defining how an AI is behaving. So yeah, I wanted to ask you if you actually imagined of like a programmer that is actually creating Kitty AI, or you would be the programmer, or what do you think if there is an AI which is actually a politician, would then the programmer who made it, which is actually the real politician behind it, or how does it work in your fictional world?
Well,
this is the question, like generally.
Thank you, Matteo. I think this is a wonderful question. I want to think of this entity as something that is beyond their programmers, right? Because it's a thinking, feeling entity, and it's a developing brain. I know it doesn't have a flesh brain, but it's a development. There's a lot of, kind of development going on. In the original story, the discovery of, or the coders who were able to come up with affective computing and affective AI were all women. I was actually inspired by Rosalind Picard at MIT, who coined the term affective computing, although it's far from what Kitty AI is capable of doing right now. So that was the originator of this kind of research. But I think this is a wonderful question. And as a programmer, I'd like to turn the question to you. Who would you want? Who would you think the programmer pool should consist of?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, I think I don't have an answer. Or in a way, it would be great if, I don't know, like all the users that are actually connected through Kitten AI would be the actual programmers that are in a way influencing this AI, which is like, in a way, doing decision-making in a very shared way. But, well, I don't know if this is realistic, but it's still like fictional. So, I mean, in that way, it would be like everybody is part of the decision-making. And then I'm also wondering, what is Kitty AI doing then?
Just processing all of that, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because apparently people like Erdogan or Trump, they don't have that kind of capacity, period. It's just, they just can't do it.
I think,
well, thank you.
It's not like the complete set of the final answer to all our questions as a politician, but I think it also stands as a response to what is happening. And it's a process of building, as I understood. It's still building up with possibilities, but it's not the final project that has all the answers, but it's a response, a better ultimate to what's actually happening. And alone in itself, it's very good to have such a response as a imagination. So we are ending our symposium. Ronald,
well, thank you so much, everybody. It was a pleasure to join you today. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you all for this wonderful symposium. Thank you for all your participation, for listening that long, discussing with us, thinking along, having new innovative ideas for our future. And I hope to see you perhaps on Thursday for our artist talk with Bo Zheng.
Yes, I would like to thank the Migros Museum für Gegenwartskunst, Heike Munde, Nuria Rita, and all the museum team. My curating family postgraduate program in curating ZHdK, along with Dorothy Richter and Ronald Kolb for the support and partnership, and also Department of Fine Arts at ZHdK again, and Anne-Marie Bucher for their support. Migros Museum for Gegenwartskunst is going to have another talk. When was this? Let's introduce this again. Nuria?
Thursday, the 21st at 1 p.m.
Thursday, 21st, 1 p.m. There will be an artist talk between Anne-Marie Bucher and Bo Zheng. Bo Zheng is one of the artists in the Potential Worlds 2 exhibition, such as Pinar. And thank you for joining and making this possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.